Is it cool?
Hey guys, welcome back to another video. Gap site. So my cousin's right there. He just turned it. We're gonna be watching Mr.nightmare's new video. So let's get right into it.
Is it scary?
Yeah, very scary.
How you can't even tell if you're spelling it right? Can't you move the camera?
This one?
Mm-hmm.
So it has 3 on it.
Sure, I'm not gonna see it. I'm just gonna hear it.
Yeah, it's not even no pictures though.
Really?
Yeah. Eh? He added pictures now?
They always do.
I mean, like him actually going like that.
Wait, no, I want to hear this.
When me and my troublemaking friends were 13 years old, one of the many rowdy and mischievous things we would do would be Saturday night ding-dong ditch sessions.
I do that.
10 years ago, we all lived on the same block in a typical suburban neighborhood. At the time, there were a lot less houses and more woods, though. I'm going to make up names for my friends for the case of this story. There was Mark, James, and Matt. Either Mark or James were usually the ones to go up to the houses and ring the bells. Matt and I, on the other hand, would usually find hiding spots right away. We hit about 5 or 6 houses. I remember all of the men who answered the doors gave pretty much the same reactions. They'd step out onto the stoop, 1 or 2 would yell something, and then they'd walk back inside. For a couple of houses, we'd ring the bell again for a better reaction. One guy yelled he was calling the cops the second time, so when he shut his door, we all booked it down the street and went to the next block over. As I mentioned, 10 years ago in this neighborhood, there were patches of wood sitting where houses sit today. On the next block over, there were a few patches of wood surrounding some of the houses, and the houses on this block seemed to be more unkempt. The first house on the block was across the street from a patch of woods, which made for a perfect hiding spot. The house was kind of run down looking, tall grass, a ratty old car with a cover on it in the driveway, and overall just a small house. Mark went up to ring the bell. He barely had time to make it across the street before the door opened. It was another man to answer the door. This guy really big, about 6 foot and stocky build. Unlike the others, he was furious immediately. He walked around his whole front yard checking the bushes, yelling threats. We all laughed as we always did. Eventually, he finally went back inside. Mark waited a few minutes, checked the windows, and then ran back up the stoop to ring the bell again. I didn't
Shout out to
see him in this
Pepsi!
house. I would not be bold enough to ring that man's bell again. Mark knew he probably didn't have as much time, so he ran to the side of the house and out of sight. The door opened much quicker this time, and this time the man came out with a rifle in his hand. We all looked at each other, simultaneously going, "Oh shit," under our breath. The man checked all the places he checked before, and then a few extra places this time, like behind his car, behind a couple trees, and then he walked to the center of his lawn and just stood there, as if he were thinking. He looked around, and then his head stopped as he was facing us in the woods. Me, Matt, and James looked at each other. We ducked lower in hopes that he didn't see us. After 10 seconds of staring in our direction, the man went back into his home. And then, we saw him appear at his front window, standing still like a statue, looking in our direction in the woods once again.
What?
We saw Mark creeping back over to the man's front door, but there was nothing we could do. We were too afraid to move or yell anything. Mark rang the bell once again and ran for it.
Why the fuck
The man didn't move though, at least not for another minute. Then he turned and walked away from the window. We didn't see Mark again, but we were still too nervous to move or say anything. The next thing I remember, we heard Mark's voice from across the street yelling, "Run." We didn't understand until we heard someone running up from behind us, realizing upon turning our heads that it was the man from across the street with his rifle in hand, pointed at us. We ran like little prey from a predator to Mark, who was waiting for us across the street. We ran for blocks until we were sure we lost him. Mark explained that he yelled when he saw the man sneaking across the street into the patch of woods with his gun. We didn't report him or any of what happened. We just told a few friends and that was it. Luckily the house was many blocks from us, so we never really had to pass it again.
That was scary. No, not really. The rifle, dude? What if you were in a situation? Is that one it?
I lived in a house
Yep.
from hell for a couple of weeks. I was a college student, and my parents were paying for a house for me to live in. I'm spoiled, I know. Well, the house was modest, nothing fancy or huge, and I was happy with
Stop.
it. Well, for the first few days, anyway. Then things quickly started getting strange. On a rainy Saturday with nothing to do, I was watching TV for a few hours. That was when I heard a scrape on my living room floor. I looked around the room thinking an animal got into the house or something. I sat back down and resumed watching TV. That was the first weird occurrence. The rain continued throughout the rest of the day and into the night, which made for an excuse to not go out. I stayed in watching more TV in the living room. I perked up when I thought I heard something from the kitchen. Laughably, I took a pillow with me as, I guess, some sort of weapon, and walked over to the kitchen doorway. There,
What is this,
in the
pillow
middle
fight?
of the dark kitchen, was a box of Cheerios on the floor, spilling out hundreds of the tiny O's. I had no idea how that could have happened. Nevertheless, I dropped the pillow and began cleaning up the Cheerios off the floor. As I was doing so, I heard a creak, like the sound weak areas of a wood floor make when someone steps on them. It was by the kitchen table. I looked up, but nobody was there. I knew I was going crazy now. Every little sound must have been making me paranoid. I cleaned the Cheerios and went back to watching TV. The thunder outside was getting louder as the bulk of the storm seemed to be passing overhead. Yet I found it to be strangely relaxing. That was the last thing I remember, appreciating the sound of the storm outside, before waking up from what seemed to be an hour-long doze. The TV was still on, but that wasn't what woke me. I remember believing I woke up to a bang or thud from downstairs. Regardless, I turned off the TV and marched upstairs to bed. The next day was normal, as was the day after that. It wasn't until the next gray, rainy day that strange things started happening again. I woke up in my bed that morning feeling like I had been drinking all night the night before. I felt sicker than I'd ever felt with any hangover before. I didn't do much walking around that day. The gloomy dark weather only made me more bedridden. I left the TV in my bedroom on all day just as background noise, with a garbage pail by my side in case I had to puke. At midday, I muted the TV after hearing sounds coming from above me. The attic. The attic door was actually in my bedroom, and most of the attic was built over that bedroom. It wasn't just one thud I heard, it was 3 or 4. I managed to get out of bed, despite the fact that every time I moved, I wanted to puke. I pulled the string to the attic door down, took one of my old baseball bats with me, and climbed up the steps.
That's a better weapon.
I pulled the light switch down to light up the attic. There were a few old boxes that must have belonged to the previous owners scattered about, but I couldn't see any living things to produce those noises. I climbed back down quickly because I was kind of scared of that attic. There were no more noises. Until that night. I woke up to, at first, what I thought was thunder, still feeling a bit sick.
Right now we're eating that, so. Shout out to
The
Pepsi.
familiar sound of a thud from up in the attic gave me chills. I pulled the string to the attic door back down, took my baseball bat
You're
once
reacting
again,
to
and
it?
climbed up the stairs. I made myself angry and screamed in the most intimidating voice I could.
This is what.
But before I could turn the light on, I heard the sound of a child giggling in the pitch-black attic.
That would be creepy.
Words cannot describe the feeling of weightlessness, the feeling of my insides dropping inside of my body, the fear that I felt. The word fear is not enough to describe what I felt at that moment. I was out of that house so fast, I don't even remember running. I called my dad in the cold rain and asked him to pick me up. I explained everything the best I could.
No. Me too.
My parents saw how emotional I was about this, and in a weird sense, I think they believed me.
Put the little stick.
I packed all of my things up with my parents the next day and moved back home. To this day, I'm convinced what I experienced in that house was completely paranormal.
What's paranormal? I never knew what that is.
Isn't that on the ghost demon country? You talked about it.
Oh no, that's
I used to work
That's
as a
something
maid
else.
for some
Not
old
that.
lady
Oh,
for
this
a
is
couple
a
of
good
weeks when
one,
I was
too.
20.
One
She
of
had
the
a
good ones.
really big yet old house on a property that could have been beautiful if she had actually taken care of it. She had 2 acres of land surrounded by woods in 3 directions and the road on the other.
Stop.
The house itself was ancient,
Pepsi
mostly
has
made of
getting me
wood,
drunk.
and the interior was really dark.
So
She would often keep the blinds shut in some rooms for reasons I didn't understand. I would sometimes open the blinds to let some sunlight in, only to find that she'd have shut them by the next time I entered the room. She lit some rooms by candle, which made the house seem even more prehistoric from the inside. To top it off, the wood floors were creaky as hell just about everywhere in the house. The woman's name was Mel. She was around 70 years old. The kind of work Mel would have me do would be mostly physical
Ask my
stuff.
cousin
She
reacted
couldn't
to
do very
this
well
because I gotta go through. Alright then, I'll make a part 2, guys. So see you later.
I react to it